You are listening to the Enormocast.
When it comes to cams, nobody stays ahead of the curve like Black Diamond. And until their climber engineers get antsy again, they've settled on quite the quiver of active protection. On top of the heap are the ultralight Camelots, the lightest, baddest cams in the land. Then, the venerable C4s have been updated time and again to achieve near perfection in smooth handling and bomber security. And rumor has it that if you hold a red C4 up to the light of an Indian Creek blood moon and whisper, "Camelot, Camelot, Camelot," a sentient coyote will trot up and teach you how to ring lock at last. And finally, for the thin end of things, the SuperTech Z4s round out the rack all the way down to the wee little maybe I can fall, but I don't really want to fall, probably will hold, but let's not find out number 0. The bottom line is nobody researches, redesigns, and continues to improve their cams like Black Diamond. So go to blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop and reward yourself with a couple new units for the coming season. You deserve it.
Listen, where are you playing in town? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
it's
yeah, the big
house.
place,
sold
that
it
side
out.
of town. That's a big
nice.
place. You sold it out.
20,000 seats.
You
really should.
The hell are you doing? I couldn't sleep. I'm checking the ropes. There was a frayed end on your rope, and I'm cutting it out. Bad weather. Now or later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, La Sportiva, and with support from Maxim Ropes. Maxim has been keeping the Enormocast off the deck since 2012.
And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enorma at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is April 7th, 2024, about 9:30 p.m. here in Colorado, and this is episode 283 of the Enormocast, a conversation with alpinist, Alaska climber, Clint Helander. And this is a throwback Enormocast. It's a face-to-face interview I got up in Munising, Michigan at the Michigan Ice Festival, but moreover, nevertheless, furthermore, inasmuch as, how many other compoundy words can I get in here? Anyway, we did it at about 9:30 in the morning after being up super late. First of all, there was the Chris Kalous Dance Party. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of why it's called that again. Just look it up. Then we went out after hours to a bar in Munising, literally called Whisky Dick's. Whisky Dick's, the bar. That place was raging. Then we went back to the hotel. And I don't know, there was a point at which somebody in my hotel room said, "What time is it?" And it was like 3:15 or something like that. And they still didn't leave. I don't know how late Clint was up. He was around at the hotel, and then I think he wisely went off maybe at like 2:45. Anyhow, this was right after that. So, yeah, good old-fashioned Enormocast, deep late-night vibes coming out in the morning. You can feel it. It's chill. We start out heavy, and it's chill. Kicking it in my hotel room in Munising, Michigan. So who's Clint Helander? Helander. Clint is an Alaskan alpinist, kind of made himself sort of the expert of a place called the Revelation Mountains in the Alaska range, but has climbed all over Alaska and all over the world. We get a bunch of stories in here from the Revelations, particularly an ascent of Golgotha with Andreas Marin, who's another friend of mine and also has been on the podcast before. You might remember Andreas from his accent. I remember that interview because I fell backwards or forwards. I don't know. I tumbled out his camper door, narrowly missing his bumper with my head. And it was hysterically funny. but it also could have been hysterically tragic had I hit the back of my head on his bumper or his hitch or something like that. Andreas Marin is not in this interview, although we do talk about him. Clint is here. And here's what I like about this interview with Clint. Clint is sort of a journeyman alpinist, a journeyman climber in Alaska. I don't think he's gotten a ton of press, for being super flashy and, and getting his name all over the internet or whatever, but he's just been banging it out up there. He went up there as a student, kind of not even that outdoorsy, and he molded himself into this alpine climber who now 40, I think. He's got a ton of experience. He's sort of a go-to guy. He knows what he's doing. He knows the ins and outs of the Alaska Range, particularly this place called the Revelations. And in this interview, we sort of go behind the scenes into what it takes to bang out these routes in a place like Alaska because, he tried to climb one mountain, or at least thought about it, for 14 years and went on several expeditions, had several near misses, not only of the summit, but also near misses in the danger sense, and finally got this thing done. We talk a lot about it, Golgotha, but it's just one of many climbs that he's spent a lot of time trying over and over again. And, we always hear the press when somebody sends something. We don't always see or hear about the expeditions that got them there, the ones where they figured out the descent but didn't summit, or the ones where they just sat in their tent for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks before just going home and not learning anything about the mountain. But yeah, we create this metaphor in here, the red point alpinism, which is actually a Josh Wharton thing that I picked up from talking to him. But this idea of trying the climb over and over again, learning a little bit each time, and then finally, hopefully sending or going home and never going back is always an option as well. That's what this one's good for. A little bit of a working person's look at what it takes to be an alpinist. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Just a little more variety here at the Enormocast coming from Natalia Grossman last episode, our bright future at the Olympics, indoor climber, plastic climber, all the way to journeyman alpinist Clint Helander.
In the south of France, there is legendary Grimpon, Le Verdon, Le Calanque, Seyuse. But there is also the legendary wind, Le Mistral. A strong, cold, nearly zealous wind that can drive the people mad, but create conditions parfaites pour escalade. One moment. Let me put down my baguette and my cigarette. Away.
Now, La Sportiva has captured the masterly wind in a new shoe, the Mistral. Slightly downturned for precision, but also designed for performance and comfort. A sticky toe patch makes the Mistral an all-arounder for hooking and jamming alike. And let me tell you something. I have never slipped my feet into a more comfortable climbing shoe. Even Performance Snug, these things feel like stuffing your feet into a buttery croissant. But they climb way better than that, as croissants are much too flaky to ride any sort of edge. And forget about jamming. So if you're looking for a light, comfortable all-arounder, ride like the wind to Sportiva.com or your local shop and try on a Mistral and see if you ever want to take it off. Butter optional.
Yeah, well, it was about 6 months after Jess and Hans-Jörg and David had died on House Peak, and I'm not a religious person at all, like complete nihilist in terms of, of anything like that. But I had this dream, and I've always had this ability in my dreams to wake up and know it's a dream. So it sucks sometimes when there's a beautiful lady in your dream. You're like, damn it, don't wake up. But with this one, Jess's wife called me and she goes, hey, Jess wants you to meet him at this place in 20 minutes. And I live in Alaska, but it was in like Spokane or something, which is where they lived. And I said, Allison, Jess is dead. She goes, no, you didn't hear. They were able to bring him back on the operating table. He's alive. And then, like can only happen in a dream, I just instantly transported to this dusky Eastern Washington desert landscape and I could see the ponderosa pines, and the sun was setting, and it was like that orange, kind of pink light, and all of a sudden this old 1980s looking Ford pickup truck just comes rambling down this dirt road, kicking up dust and everything, and just slides to a stop right next to me, and Jess was in there, and he goes, "Get in," kind of the way he talked, and I couldn't see him directly. It was kind of like in my peripheral vision, but I got in, and I just remember sitting there in silence as we were driving down this dirt road for a while, and the air was warm, and I had my hand out the window, flying my hand out with the wind, making a wing out of it. And I couldn't see him directly, but I could look in the rearview mirror and see his eyes, and they were completely at peace and super calm. And he goes, "I don't have long." I go, "Okay, I know." And the whole time in the dream, I was thinking, "Don't wake up, don't wake up," and just trying to figure out what this was. And then he pulled over, and he goes, "This is where you get out." And then I looked, and then I could see him for the first time, and like totally clear. And he looked at me, and he goes, "I'm okay, man. Really, I'm okay." And it was super crazy because I shot up out of bed in Alaska in the middle of the night in the winter. I'm like, what the hell was that? And then I told his parents, and they said that they'd had a slightly different form of the same dream.
Really?
Which was super weird. And then that really helped me to kind of like finish processing that grief of losing him and other people. But then like a few months after that, I had another dream where I was climbing up on this mountain, and then in the dream, I'm like, it's happening again. And this little shadowy figure was climbing up right next to me, and he got to the top, and it was him. I'm like, "It's good to see you again, dude. I love you so much." And he gave me this big hug that I could like feel in my body. And I still can't explain that, but it was in some ways closure, and it was like communicating beyond this realm, which I totally don't believe in, but I can't explain it, but it's really weird because I don't feel a need to explain it, and maybe it's just my mind like processing it, but it was really, really cool. And I felt like it kind of brought me like a lot of peace, after losing one of my best friends and in this like incredibly tragic accident.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, your body and your mind, it was just maybe also just finding a way to do that.
Yeah.
Like a more visceral way to do that. You just walked in and we were talking about this, and it came up, and I thought, well, we'll open with it, even though it's, it's sort of a both sides of the coin emotional story, because it actually helped you, to hear that. But also the one time I met Jess was at this festival the last time I was here at the Michigan Icefest. And I remember a little just casual conversation we had at the bagel shop that's now a weed shop across the road there. And I remember how we were just kind of joking about like just kind of being a little weird here. And he's like, "Yeah, it's a little weird here." Like, I was like, "Yeah." That was it. It's a cool guy. And then it wasn't too long after that, actually. What year was that when that accident happened? How do you remember?
2019.
Yeah. So that actually explains, because I've been trying to remember what year I was here, but that explains it, because it was I was like, was it 2020 or 2019? I think I was here 2019. So yeah. Anyway, and then knew Hans Org from the podcast, having talked to him, and I had only met David, but yeah, that was a couple hard years through 2018 and 2019 and 2017 as well too. So that was kind of like, I remember that everybody was like, "What's going on with climbers, with alpinists?" And it was a hard few years.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And like the number of times when people, just random people who, are kind of outside of climbing or whatever, would say, "Oh, have you seen that movie, The Alpinist, about that guy that died in Alaska?" I was like, "Yeah, he died with my other main climbing partner, Ryan, after completing the route that Ryan and I had first tried 2 years prior.
Mhm.
And Ryan swore that he was never going to go back and go down that gully where he ended up getting killed.
Wow.
So I just remember after that for a while, like I just like put my climbing gear in this dark corner of my closet and didn't look at it for a while. And I contemplated selling all of it. And I really had to kind of redefine what my future as a climber looked like. And I wasn't sure if I was going to go back and do routes like that anymore, or ever again. But yeah, I think just having conversations with many, many people who have been through that has helped. And here we are.
Yeah. I mean, that's the processing of it. It's a hard thing to process. But the truth is not that many people do end up walking away because, when you're in it, at some point you've accepted in a way that this is part of the game. And it's like it's weird because I just don't find that many people who necessarily leave it all together when these things happen. They find a way to keep going because it's part of who they are, and it's like definitely part of who you are. And did you ever think about the other sort of coping, which is to be inspired to do the things that those guys were doing, or not specifically the roots, but just say, well, this is our lives and this was their lives, and we're just keep going and do cooler stuff and live the life.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I've really tried to define like how I approach things, and I like to say that I'm cautiously bold, meaning that there's certain times when I'm going to take a risk and it feels risky, but I also know that I'm doing everything in my power to do it in the safest way possible, right? So Golgotha, for example, it took 14 damn years to climb that mountain over 5 or 6 attempts. Every time we turned around, but we know we're making the right decision, even if we're more than halfway up this thing. And you can always make more money to fly back there, but if you make the wrong decision, that's your last time doing anything. So,
I kind of got this impression, or not this impression, but I was talking to Josh Wharton and on the other show, on the Run Out, and he mentioned, this idea of the red point alpinism, which I knew was going on, but like that there was sort of this, this phrase that went around, like, we're going to go red point this thing. And he was like, it's weirdly like a sport climb. Each time you learn more beta, and, it's serious beta. It's not just a move, but, about where the route should go and where it's dangerous and all those sorts of things. And you just keep on coming back. And you joked when we got on this thing, I asked if you were in a relationship, and you said, no, you're full Alaska or something like that. Yeah. But it's like sometimes those other things ticking away make you kind of anxious about how many more trips you're going to get to do as life moves in a different direction. But it's good to have patience.
Oh yeah. And I remember making it to my 30th birthday. And
what year was that?
Let's see. I was born in 84. So that was 2014.
Right.
And being kind of surprised, but also feeling like, okay, I've made it to 30. Now I got to make it to 40. And now I'm thinking well beyond that, of course. But gosh, there's so many mistakes you can make. And there's so many things outside of like normal climbing that make alpinism potentially incredibly dangerous. But the rewards are so huge. I think really I just tried to look at things from a farther lens and think long term, and like just do more planning as opposed to letting things kind of fall where they may, and reading the early warning signs of things as they happen, right? So with the mileage, you start going, oh man, okay, cool. Like we thought we were going to do it in a day. Now we're into hour 20 and we're still a long way. Why push it? Let's just come back and bring more food, bring more gear, and then we'll get it the next time. And so you learn these things from failure.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, it's also called maturing, right? And starting to look at the world in a bigger place and the consequences and things like that. I think it's pretty natural. and it's interesting. You mark the 30 as like this goal because young men in their 20s is like a problem. It's like across all things, like they're more dangerous in driving cars, and they're more risk takers in all parts of life. Like any insurance person will tell you that there's this. We're dangerous. We're dangerous.
They
people
won't let
when
you
we're in
rent
our
a
20s.
car until you're 25 or something.
Right? Yeah, they shouldn't anyway. And it's also why they recruit them as soldiers. They don't recruit 30-year-olds because we're like, no, I'm not going over there where those guys are shooting at me.
Let's
It's
think this
stupid.
through for a minute, guys.
Anyhow, one of the things you mentioned, I saw your presentation the other night, and I thought it was great. And with alpinism, I think you have to like climbing in general, you have to kind of balance like humility and bravado, because if you're too cautious and you're like, you'll never leave the house, but you also have to, you have to also be, submit yourself to the mountain and understand it and remember that it can crush you. So you have to be both things. And I thought that was a really nice balance in the way you talked about climbing and it talked about your friends and things like that. But one of the things that stood out was that you were absolutely allergic to outdoor stuff and camping and all these sorts of things. And so tell me a little bit about that transition of that kid to someone who wanted to climb these big peaks. I mean, you were born and raised in Alaska, is that right?
I was born and raised in Washington, west of Seattle, and then I moved up to Alaska when I was 18 for one semester of college that became 2 and became 2 years. And my dad to this day gives me hell because he's like, we bought you a backpack, a backpacking backpack when you were a little kid. We couldn't get you to go hiking. You hated it.
I was the same way.
Yeah, and then now all of a sudden you're like Mr. Extremo Outdoors. Like, what happened? But it was, I think, just the switch was flipped when I went up there, and I still can't really describe it, but in the first 5 weeks of being at college, we went rafting and ice climbing and rock climbing and backcountry skiing, and it opened up this kind of portal to a different world that I didn't even know existed. And it happened very intrinsically over time that I just gravitated towards ice climbing. And anyone who knows anything about Alaska who's a climber knows that we have terrible rock climbing. In fact, in an early edition of Climbing magazine, maybe 20 years ago, they rated the Seward Highway as the worst climbing crag
I remember that.
in the country. And they said, it's so bad, we're not even going to include a picture of it. So it was really...
Is it like a road cut or some shit?
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, we have these old pictures of like placing number 2 cams in drill holes and stuff like that.
Right.
But our most classic route on the highway called Classic Crack fell down a couple of years ago.
Oh.
So go figure. But yeah, I was climbing Water Ice 5 before I even knew how to climb 5/8 trad. And then I kind of got more and more into climbing mountains, and I placed these goals of doing Rainier and the Moose's Tooth. And then I just kind of had to engineer it back. Like, okay, well, the Cassine's 5/8, Water Ice 4. So I have to be able to climb Water Ice 5 and 5/9 or 5/8 in mountain boots, which means I have to go to Yosemite and learn how to climb 5/9 trad. Because if I can do that in 70 degrees and rock shoes, then surely I can climb 5/8 in big mountain boots. Yeah.
Just one grade harder.
Yeah. And then, there was numerous epics in Yosemite, I'm sure, as you can imagine, very well. And maybe you were one of the guys yelling at me to not do whatever stupid thing I was doing.
Probably not.
Yeah. So for many years, I was like this. I'd go to Yosemite and be a rock climber for 2 weeks. And then like at the very end, I'm like, okay, now I'm climbing 510. And then I would go back and not really be able to rock climb anything that wasn't going to fall off in my hand for the next year until I got back to Yosemite or Red Rock or something. But it was a slow progression, but I think it was really valuable to learn over a long period of time and hone the skills through trial and error.
Yeah. I mean, but like when did you climb something big enough to say like, well, I just graduated, in your mind? I mean, maybe it didn't happen that way like it was at that time, but like looking back, like what was the first thing that, as you were bumbling around and you're dreaming of the Moose's Tooth, you obviously didn't go straight to that. I don't know if you've ever even climbed it, but yeah, like what was kind of like, yeah, here I am. I'm in this game after all.
The first thing that I was really, I think, proud of, just in terms of getting to a point where, okay, I'm a climber now, or an explorer or whatever, was in the Revelation Mountains, probably in 2008 or 2009, when we did our first descent, which was the Ice Pyramid, and that was with my climbing partner Seth, who also went to the University of Alaska, and he was older than me by a couple of years, but we had made this kind of long-term goal of climbing all these peaks in this sub-range of the Alaska range called the Revelation Mountains, and there really hadn't been a whole lot of people who had gone there. So we flew out there, and the first year we tried it, and this was just kind of a sub-goal to our big goal at the time, which was this Mount Mausolus peak. And we got up that, and then like, oh wow, we just did a pretty big first descent. And I look back at it now, and we 3 days on that thing, and now I would do it in a day. It had all that technical climbing on it that we had kind of honed our skills for years, and then we had to figure out a pretty complicated descent and go over a pass and come back to our camp. And yeah, we really just learned a lot, and that just slingshotted me kind of into that next 10 years of doing exploratory alpinism in Alaska specifically, and each year kind of trying to go for more technical, more improbable peaks and unclimbed lines.
And this guy, Seth, what was his last name? Sorry.
Seth Holden.
Yeah. So this guy, Seth Holden, was more experienced than you?
He was. Yeah. When I was 20 and met him, he'd already climbed El Cap and done all these things that, for me as a complete neophyte, he was a demigod pretty much, from all these things he'd done. And at that time, Mount Rainier was something that I thought I would do when I was 40. And something like El Cap was just, I was probably asking, well, how do you get the rope up there at that point in time? Like so out of my element. But you learn quick when you're really psyched and young.
Right.
And you just take it all in.
What was his personality like?
He was like as much of a Renaissance man as I think I've ever met still. He had a degree in economics and had a real job, which was pretty rare among our group of friends, and just seemed like he was good at everything he did. He could talk to ladies. He was incredibly fit. He was smart. He had a ton of money because he saved money, unlike us who were like just working these menial jobs trying to get through college. And he was just kind of a quiet, very calculated guy. And you could look in his eyes and you always felt like he was only telling you about 10% of what he was thinking. And I really learned a lot from him.
What do you think he saw in you? Or what was like, because I mean, I asked that question because I'm always interested if people reflect on what qualities they bring to the game versus just like, I don't know why someone wants to climb with me, because I think about my own partners and I can tell you why I climb with them. But I don't know if they think about that themselves. So what do you think he saw in you? I mean, if you're like that big a Gumby, like why did it work out that he wanted to take you along versus somebody that I'm sure he knew people that were more experienced?
I think he saw a really psyched loudmouth with some potential. Okay. And he was cautious in the fact that he was extremely calculated. Whereas I was willing, I've always had a pretty high risk tolerance, and I would go out there, but then I think we kind of balanced each other with the risk versus reward. And we would go out there and do these trips and just kind of figure it out together. Ultimately, probably he just maybe saw that I was willing to show up every time. And I came to him with a lot of ideas. And sometimes he'd say, no, that's crazy. And then other times we would just go and figure it out. And it ended up, we struck gold in the Revelations, really.
Right.
Yeah.
That Revelations thing seemed to be a bit of a conveyor belt, or you were like, you'd go and see one thing and maybe get it done and see another, and like this real like love of that place and progression through there. What was so special about that place? I mean, other than, I guess it sounds like it was just somewhere new that wasn't all hammered by a lot of people.
Yeah, it was this really wild, remote place. It's only 165 miles west of Anchorage, really, at the southern tip of the Alaska Range. But in the mid-2000s, to find a range that only had a couple of the peaks that were climbed, just so much potential of extremely high quality 3,000 or 4,000 foot elevation lines is rare. And I haven't found any other place that is anywhere close to that.
Mm-hmm.
So we just got really lucky and tried to hammer it out as quick as we could. And then, still being the loudmouth that I was, I wrote about it enough that other people started going there. And then I felt like, oh man, we really got to get this done before some Euro team comes in and just smashes all of my goals in like, one trip.
Right. The A team shows up. And you're like,
exactly.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I mean, is it different now? Like, is it pretty well visited now?
Well,
I mean, those things kind of gather like steam, and then all of a sudden, it's like a lot of people start going.
Oh yeah. It's brought a lot of attention to it. A lot of the best climbers in the world now have gone there and have done one or two trips, and there's not very many unclimbed peaks left, and kind of feel like many of the plumb lines have been taken, but there's still a couple things. But.
Yeah, we won't talk about that. There's sort of this there's thing buried in what we're talking about, and maybe people picked up on the fact that we're talking about Seth in past tense, but he didn't pass away climbing. Tell me what happened.
He and my friend Brandon were out flying around in a little Super Cub plane, right? So it's pilot in the front and second person in the back. They're very, very light planes. Everyone in Alaska has a Super Cub, it seems like. And what they're really good for is they take off and they land in really, really short, tight areas. So they were out looking for moose for a fall hunt. And they did this classic mistake. And they did the Super Cub moose stall, they call it. Brandon was flying, and they must have seen a moose, and they were flying low. And he probably dipped the wing to look at it and just lost lift and took a non-recoverable dive and just right into a gravel bar and killed them instantly. And of course, that was shocking. It was the first time any of us had ever lost two close friends, and in one really tragic accident. And so for me, other than the loss of losing my friend and partner, who I still really heavily relied on for kind of, I think what I really appreciated with Seth was that I thought that he balanced my recklessness that was just the result of not as much experience. And so I didn't have any other partner that I could trust to keep me safe and check me in the mountains during that time. And I wasn't sure if I would go back to the Revelations with anybody until I found another mentor. And you might actually even know him, Scotty Vinchik. He was a Yosar guy, and at that point in time, he was living up in Alaska, and he was significantly older than me. But he really took me under his wing, and we did a bunch of big climbs together out there as well. But yeah, I think Seth was he really was my first big mentor. And even more than the climbing, I just kind of learned the balance of life from him.
You had like I think you described it as sort of a long-term pathway that you had kind of measured out for these climbs that you had kept seeing, and which ones would be first and which ones, would train you for the next one. Was that something that you had devised, or that was more Seth's kind of plan, or was it just sort of something that you guys came up with together?
It just happened organically because we would stand on top of one peak that we had just topped out on, and then we'd go, whoa, look at that thing over there. And it just felt very natural and organic to kind of go, okay, we need to do that one, and then that one, and then someday we're going to go do that thing. And just trying to reverse engineer how we were going to get there, because we were both still learning in some way, and we had a long way to go to be what I would consider to be really competent alpinists.
Yeah, well, and the someday we'll do that thing was what?
That was Golgotha.
Right.
That was really the crown jewel for us of our ambitions in the range.
Describe it.
Golgotha is just shy of 9,000 feet, and I think what really inspired me about many of these mountains was the writings of David Roberts, and they had gone and been the first climbers to go to that range in 1967, and he had this very poignant way of describing these beautiful, intricate mountains with just a single word or a line, and he called Golgotha a route for the next generation or the next. And when we were looking at that east face from 10 miles away, it just seemed incredibly steep and black, and there was this one line that just fell directly from the summit, this razor thin white line that looked like it was just caked in rime and ice and snow, just separated by two gigantic granite buttresses. And it was the most perfect line that I could envision. And it just beckoned me. It called me. And so we knew that was going to be incredibly hard. And we didn't know how we were going to get there, but we were going to keep working on these other peaks and gain those skills so that one day we would stand under it and know that we had a pretty good shot.
So you did. I mean, you eventually started making attempts on this thing. Yeah, talk about the whole process. I mean, who'd you go with first? Did you ever attempt it with Seth and before the airplane accident, or was it something that happened after that?
Seth and I laid eyes on it in 2010 on the last trip we ever did together. We flew over and landed on the main Revelation Glacier, and then we scoped that face from this pass, and it was too late in the season at that point in time to drop in there and try it. It was too warm. But we definitely concocted that, okay, I think we're ready. And we were going to come back the next year, and then within a couple of months, he had died in the plane crash. And it was a couple of years before I went back with my friend Ben Trokey of Alaska, and then we ended up trying that route, but bad conditions forced us to turn around, and we ended up making the first ascent of the peak via a significantly easier snow couloir up to an adjacent face in terrible conditions. But that was where I really learned about how style matters for me, because yeah, we ticked off an unclimbed peak, but it didn't really mean that much to me, because the goal was to do it via this really difficult, improbable way, and we'd found a cheat around it. And so that never really sat right with me, and I knew that I wanted to come back and climb that plumb, direct, perfect line and kind of finish this long-term dream that Seth and I had together.
But wait, what's interesting about that, though, in a way, is like it's in your mind like you cheated, but what's also part of the story is that that was your first red point, that and probably gave you a ton of information and set you up to then start really figuring out the intricacies of that hard route. So it's like it really was the right kind of almost the right way to do it in the end, because did you use that as the descent when you climbed it?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah. So I mean, totally, there you go.
Yeah.
It's like you actually put this super major building block in to the actual final success. But in your mind, you're like, okay, we just cheated.
Oh yeah,
You know, it's kind of wild because it's like that's just the way alpinist sort of minds work. That was a cheat, but it turns out it was actually like, you know, getting through the first bolt on the project and figuring out the bouldering start, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah.
So anyway, keep going.
Really, just it was finding another partner who was equally psyched on spending long times in the mountains. And really, the key to being a good alpinist is to just be willing to not climb a lot. A lot of really expensive camping trips into the mountains where you sit there and you freeze your ass off. And I've gone on entire 3-week expeditions where I haven't even put my harness on. And that really sucks. But after you swear that you're never going to come back, you have to be willing to go out and try again and again and again sometimes. I came back with Andres Marine in 2016. And we're so lucky in Alaska to have these friends who are extremely talented pilots, and they have their own planes. And that's really why I've been able to do so much, is because I have these friends who help in my success without having to have a commercial pilot fly us in for $2,000. We have these buddies that fly us in for gas. And so they landed us at the base of the mountain on this really tiny glacier. It's like a 1/4 mile wide with these 4,000 foot walls above you. And they landed us right at the base with 3 weeks of all of our gear. So we didn't have to approach. We were right there. And we thought at the time we were totally set until we realized that we were completely trapped in this little fishbowl of a glacier. And so he and I kind of started, looking at the route. And then it went from 40 below to 30 above at 5,000 feet in March. And it snowed 3 feet in 24 hours. And then we realized that we were in extreme trouble. And it was the morning of maybe our 8th day of the expedition, and it was snowing really hard. And so we started thinking about moving our camp, and we had just come out of our tent, and I was filming this time lapse of the snow falling as we were organizing our camp, and we couldn't see anything. It was a complete whiteout, and we just heard this enormous crack. And we looked at each other, and he just said, "Run." And we ran out of base camp through 3 feet of snow, really just stumbling and falling over ourselves, and just ran away from the noise. And then before I knew it, I got hit by this blast of wind and started to feel myself get covered up. And I remember looking over at Andres and trying to keep eyes on him. But at that moment, I was sure we were going to die, like 100% sure. And we were just kind of fighting and trying to swim, and I got tumbled around a little bit, and then it just stopped. It's like, okay, I'm still on top, and I was kind of buried up to my legs. And then we pushed ourselves out, and he stood up, and we looked back, and camp was just gone, totally gone. And that was when I turned my camera on, and I made this video, just kind of instinctively. I still don't know why I did it. But as you saw in the presentation, it was like that wasn't staged. It was completely legitimate moments after we had survived this cataclysmic avalanche that completely took out our base camp. And long story short, we spent the next week trying to survive in this little narrow, tiny valley and with the remnants of our tent. And miraculously, we found everything. But needless to say, we did not climb that year. We were just trying to survive, and we got picked up after a week of numerous avalanches, like still dusting our tent behind this rock. And after that, I swore I would never go back. And of course, that ended up not being true. Andres and I came back the next year, and
wait, let's go. No, I mean, it's an interesting thing because it's like it is such this big part of it all, right? I'll never go back. I mean, even as just like me as a climber, like in Rocky Mountain National Park or something like that, going up on the Diamond in winter, which I did a few times. And like each time, even just that little thing, I'm not doing this again. This is gnarly and too cold, and why? And then that process of whatever happens to your brain or whatever, like tell me just a little bit about that. Like, I'm never going back. Like, how long did that thought last? Where because you got flown out, somebody showed up. Was it on the plane? I mean, was it like 2 weeks later? Was it like, yeah, what happened? Tell me just about the process, because I know you've probably been through it a number of times. This, like, I'm never coming back. This is bullshit. I got to go do something else. Tell me about the moments or how that usually goes down.
I think at any problem, at least for me, I look for a solution. And okay, well, the problem wasn't that we were there. The problem is that we were camped there and we couldn't leave. And so we vowed to come back the next year and camp on a bigger glacier that was safer, and then just approach there when the conditions were right. So, like I said, the mistake wasn't being there, it was being stuck there. And as I learned more about the conditions of the area, and especially when the conditions are kind of supposed to be right, which is in the spring when it's not too cold but not too warm and there hasn't been too much snow, you kind of go, okay, well, we should sometime in March get a 2 or 3 week high pressure system that, if it hasn't snowed a lot, would put that route in prime shape. And that's just the stuff you experience from being in these areas year after year and noticing trends. So we went back in 2017 and it hadn't snowed for a long time. So we knew conditions were pretty good. And there were 3 of us on that trip. Our buddy Leon Davis joined us, and everything was perfect. And then we broke a crampon halfway up that forced our retreat. So, that was not a mistake. It was just a tragic gear malfunction. And okay, well, proof of concept works. We just have to come back now and find these same conditions. And so we came back in 2019 or 2018, I think, and it was just way too snowy, so we didn't try it. And then finally in 2022, the conditions all lined up again, and we finally sent her.
How far did you get on the crampon breakage trip?
Oh, we got really high, over halfway up the face, and we solved a lot of questions. And then we even tried to make it work. We took our little brass nuts that we had and tried to make this heel or toe bail and had Dyneema slings, and it just wasn't going to work for grade 6 climbing. But we got right below the crux and we could see it, and yep, it's as scary as it looks. But we knew that we were going to come back the next time, and if we got there, we were either going to do that pitch and it would open up the access to the upper mountain, or we wouldn't. And then after that, we'd probably be done. Because how many times can you go back?
You can keep going back,
yeah,
as long as you don't die. I mean, right? And that's like the retreat mentality. Like, we can come back, but not if we don't make it back. So, what do you like personality-wise? I mean, you called yourself a loudmouth, at least when you were younger, and maybe emotions can run high or whatever. But what's your coping when this crampons breaks and you feel like fate hates you, and why has this happened, and like, do you just shut up and eat it? Do you freak out? Do you yell obscenities into the void? Like, who are you on a climb when these stupid things go wrong that you can't control?
I think I turn my anger and frustration into drive to return and solve it. I mean, I don't like failing, and as much as a crampon breaking isn't a personal failure, it still is a failure. And I learned right then and there, I need to carry an extra crampon bail in my bag. It doesn't weigh anything, but if I had a little 10-gram piece of metal, we would just continue right now. So yeah, I turned that into this, like, a rage into an intense desire to succeed. And that drive pushes me a lot.
So talk about the ascent, the send, if you will, if we want to keep this dumb red pointing metaphor going.
So Andres and I come back in 2022, and now we are both convinced this is the last time we're going to come back.
100%.
How many years have we spent sitting under here at the same exact point? And finally, the conditions lined up. The weather was good. Snow conditions were excellent. The mountain was coated in ice, and it just kind of went really smooth. We went over this pass, and we dropped down into that glacier that we'd almost lost our lives in the 2016 avalanche, and Andreas had named it the Misfit Glacier. He's a big Misfits fan. And we just worked up the mountain, and we knew from our previous experiences there that there was a cave that we could bivvy in. So we adopted our pattern from doing it in a day climb to taking multiple days of gear to ensure our success, that we weren't going to get cut back by running out of food or fuel. And just had this incredible night in this giant, luxurious cave where we could take our harnesses and crampons off and walk around in complete safety, and then completely mentally and physically recharge. And then the next day quested up and got to the crux pitch, and it was really tough, but it went. And then once we got above that, I knew that we were going to get to the top by hook or by crook. Nothing was going to stop us barring a completely blank wall. And we thought we'd get to the top that day, but it took another complete full day of climbing, and then kind of another day after that to get to the summit, and then come back down our first descent route, and then drop back down into the glacier, and then get back to our base camp, which had subsequently been destroyed by winds and carried off our gigantic dome tent with all of our foods.
So what happened then?
Then we just had to survive. So but we're like, this sucks. It's terrible. And we were just kind of coping in this. We found the fly of the tent and made this like circus tent parachute type survival area. But we didn't really care because we just finally ticked this incredible thing off. And man, it felt great. We were still just kind of reveling in that success. And it meant a lot for the two of us personally, and for me too, because I kind of felt like after 13 expeditions into that area, that I'd finally kind of done everything I had intended to do and closed off this vision that I'd created with Seth. And we just really hunkered down for a week until the plane could come pick us up. But what a trip.
So are you guys communicating then? I mean, you got a sat phone.
Yeah.
And so basically you're like calling an Uber that happens to be an airplane, and it's just waiting for having a chance to get in there. A
very, very, very expensive Uber. Yeah.
Yeah. That's something that's really like a modern change. It's not that modern, but the differences between early expeditions and that was just waiting it out and having sort of this like general pickup date that when these guys are going to show up and stuff like that. And I remember I went up to Mount Proboscis and the Unclimbables, and we were on the way up there, and we were like, okay, we got to make sure we get a radio, from these guys, and because you could I think rent them or whatever. But and then we got there and we were all psyched and got all packed up and flew in. We flew in with a helicopter and an airplane, because the pontoon plane could land on the lake, but then the chopper like slung all our stuff up to the base of Proboscis. Got it all out of there. Chopper takes off, and then I don't know how long it took us to realize we'd forgotten to get a fucking radio. We had no communication with the outside world and we just, I think it was 30 days actually. And
it's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Yeah, but I mean, then like later we were, we're bored because it did start raining a lot, and but in these like little flash sun spots, we started like bouldering, and then one of the guys, Chris Ryder, he took this we didn't have pads, and he took this pretty bad fall and like scraped up his thigh really bad, and like all of us were just had that suddenly. We're like, if you fuck yourself up, that's it. We're still in here for another 15 days, like with you with a broken femur or whatever, because he really like wailed on his thigh. And we just kind of like, all just like, all right, well, that let's go sit in the cave and don't move. Like it was just kind of really this revelation of like, oh yeah, we kind of fucked up not having any sort of communication out here. And then of course the pickup date didn't work out, and we were just like, we brought all our stuff up on this ridge where the chopper could land, and we spent the whole day waiting and like stomping out this awesome platform actually in the dirt, actually moving huge boulders and all this shit. And then it didn't show up because somewhere between us and them there was bad flying conditions, even though it was okay where we were. And we moved all our stuff back down, set our tents back up. Yeah, it was just I just remember like this sort of little bit of just creeping fear the whole time at the end of like, well, are they coming? Is it happening? Like, what's going on? Did they forget about us? It was kind of wild. Anyway, just like a whole side story about the modern way of and like you said, you have these friends and you have all this communication with your pilots, and they even come and watch over you at some times. I think you talked about with Mount Hunter.
Yeah, it's an incredible thing and very unique. There's not too many places in the world where you just fly these planes in, and oftentimes they land you right at the base of these gigantic mountains and then just say, see you later. I'll be there in 2 or 3 weeks or whenever you want to get out. But it's really, really cool. And I think it's one of my favorite things about climbing in Alaska is that involvement with aviation and these super talented pilots that really have opened up tremendous access to these mountains that you would otherwise have no ability to access. And especially having them as your friends, it's really wild, because I have been on numerous climbs where they fly over just to check you out, and it's kind of cool to know that they're watching out and making sure that we're on the right path, and they know where we are just in case. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, and so you close your chapter in the Revelations with a nice bow on top of Golgotha, and what came next?
So I'd had this other objective on Mount Hunter in Alaska, which is the third tallest of the 3 main peaks in the central Alaska range. And this had been an objective that I'd looked at for a long time, and actually one that we had discussed doing with Jess Ross Kelly and David Lama. Like by chance, when I was climbing with Jess back in 2017, he kind of became my de facto new partner, and very quickly an extremely close friend. And we had, again, like Seth, mapped out this whole like decade of things we were going to do in Alaska and Pakistan and whatnot. And then what a crazy experience when he got on the North Face team, and I kind of got on with them as a photographer for a little bit. And then we're at this trade show, and one of the North Face guys comes up and goes, "Hey, you guys should try and climb with David Lama." And we're like, "What? Us? Like me? Like I'm not David Lama worthy, you know?"
Right.
It was super crazy. But we found ourselves going on this expedition to Mount Logan to go try and do this unclimbed route on the southeast face. But the weather was so bad, and we weren't sure we were going to be able to get in. And so I showed them this line on Mount Hunter that I wanted to do, and we almost went and did that. But then we ended up getting into Mount Logan, and so this was just something that Jess and I were going to do. And then, of course, tragically, they all died on House Peak. But eventually I put that line back in the forefront of my mind and made it a major goal. And I went back and did that this year with a local friend, August Franzen from Alaska. And we tried it the year before and had some bad weather once we got up there. I took a monster crevasse fall on the approach, but again, just like other peaks, we learned a lot from that failure. And I think ultimately it's kind of cool to not get up really hard objectives your first time, because it just makes it mean that much more when you finally do find success, right? If you flash your project like the very first time, then you're like, oh, well, that wasn't that hard. But if you have to work at it for a year or two or 14, then when you finally do send it, it means a lot. And so he and I, August, we went in there and it's like we just paid our dues. The weather was finally really good and it just went according to plan. We spent 3 days up on that thing and found exceptionally beautiful hard climbing, but traversed the whole massif and came down and like, whoa, we just did that thing and like didn't really have any epics. What's going on? You know, like we didn't have any avalanches, didn't fall in any crevasses this year. The weather was good. Like, that's weird.
Maybe that wasn't so hard after all. It's like when you downgrade your project because you finally sent it and you're like, when you sent it, you feel good. And it's like, well, that wasn't that hard. What was my problem? Yeah. No, that's interesting. It's like, yeah, I mean, I just, the story of Golgotha, and I guess this in a kind of a microcosm is such, I think it's just this interesting story because it's revealing as to what goes into this climb, this style of climbing, because that Golgotha, you know, was just like I said, you put in these building blocks, you understood the route, and you'd had most of the route done, and then that little bit of information about the cave, you know, changed everything as well. And it's just kind of cool that Red Point alpinism mentality. I've
never thought about it like that, but I do like that. Like, for example, we're going to go back to Alaska this spring and we have this objective, and I would love to get to the top this year, but I'm already in my mind going, hey, this project is super hard for me. Mm-hmm. This could take 10 years to figure out, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And that's something I didn't really think of in that way even 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to kind of ask you about like your stoke and, and sort of your longevity, not just of your life, but of like this stoke to just keep going back and doing things. You know, you sort of describe yourself as, you know, that was one of the things that you thought maybe was appealing to Seth, is that you were stoked and you had all this energy and you would show up. I think about the kind of expedition grind, you know, next year we're doing this, and then after that we're doing this, and as soon as you're in the plane leaving the one thing, you're thinking about the next thing or whatever. Like, how was that like maintained, and how do you feel like it's evolved in your mind? And do you ever think like, I'm just like on this wheel and grinding these things out, or is it all still enough magic for you that it's like burning?
It just kind of does feel like it's something that intrinsically I still want to do. Living in Alaska, I know a lot of Nordic ski racers who throughout high school, that was all they did, and they got pushed super hard, and then they raced at super high levels nationally, internationally, and now they just kind of don't really ski anymore. And I think I've always kind of looked at alpinism, and specifically, you know, climbing in general, as something that I want to do for my whole life in some capacity. But I think alpinism has an expiration date, and knowing that, I feel like I just want to give it my best within reason, while still living a balanced life for as long as I can and as safely as I can, or until I just realize that I'm done. And that hasn't happened for me yet. And then I draw a ton of collective stoke from seeing my friends and people who I know casually or who I just respect, you know, from seeing in the mountains, like Jackson and Matt and Alan. I mean, dude, that stoked me so much, right? And it does. I think anybody who's a climber and looked at that got incredibly excited.
Their presentation or what they did.
Oh, I mean, when I saw that photo, that they'd done that, and like knowing in the background that they had been trying that for a couple of years, I was like, oh man, I'm not trying hard enough. I need to keep going. And that to me, like, that got me as psyched as like any Mark Twight poster I saw, 20 years ago. Like, it totally reinvigorated my stoke as somebody who's approaching 40 years old. And then at the same time, I try and be that for other people in whatever capacity, limited as it is, that I have. Just trying to be a positive force and motivate people. And then I get stoked from like 25-year-old local kids who are climbing harder than I ever was at 25. And now, like, they're my partners. And I just try to, I think, just stay in the game,
What's, you just mentioned the expiration date. Like, you just said that as a fact, like alpinism has an expiration date. Are you talking about your body falling apart? I mean, there's obviously the horrible expiration date that can happen. But yeah, what did you kind of, what does that mean to you when you said that? Because I mean, Steve Swenson would disagree. Well, I mean, he would agree, but he's gotten way out past what people would normally, I think, consider like the age or whatever that you hang it up.
God, we would all love
Tackle.
We would all love to be a Steve Swenson or a Jack Tackle or Jay Smith or whatnot. But yeah, I think that for most people, there just comes a time when your body or your mind or life, kids, job, whatever, just forces you to hang it up. And I don't know when that's going to come for me or what will be the deciding factor, but I just want to do it for as long as I can and as long as I really want to. And there's been times where, like, for a long time, I felt like I needed to go on an expedition. It was just something that I did. It was, it's spring, I go to the Alaska range. And now I try to listen to my internal psyche and make sure that I really am, it's what I want to do. And if I don't want to, then I don't. Then I go climbing somewhere else in the desert where I actually get more climbing in. But yeah, it's just keep going.
What about elsewhere? I mean, what else? I mean, where else are your passions for this alpinism thing? And have you gone to altitude and messed with that kind of thing?
Yeah, I've been to Patagonia. I've stood on top of Fitzroy and tried Cerro Torre, and I've been to Nepal twice. And the thing that, like, for me personally, I would love to go climbing in Pakistan more, but it just comes down to finding that balance in life. And with the jobs I've worked in the past, it hasn't really worked out for the season to allow that. But I think what I've ultimately come to realize is that for me, like, I really just love climbing in Alaska. And so if I only have so much time, I want to dedicate as much of my time to climbing in Alaska for now. And I still hope to get to Pakistan and do some big stuff. But I remember being in Nepal and it was just kind of dry. And I remember it was April and I was really just sitting there. I'm like, I'm on this dream vacation trying to climb a cool peak. But I just kept wishing that I was back home climbing on the beautiful, pristine glaciers in Alaska, flying in on a plane. And I think it's just like, it's where all of my really good memories are. And then I get to occasionally add to that pile of memories there. And I really like that.
You mentioned being like kind of surprised or waking up one day and realizing you're a mentor now to some of these younger people that you're climbing with, even though, this guy, August, this is, according to you, a better climber than you are. That's not as important as the experience that you have when it comes right down to it. Have you found yourself in a position of, being that guy that can sort of give the comfort or the advice about losing partners? And I say that because, I talked to, I've talked to Conrad a lot about that part of his life and part of his not just on the podcast, but privately. And, when Hayden died and stuff like that, he was sort of had some wisdom or I mean, maybe he didn't have wisdom, but it was just someone who'd understood what it was like to lose somebody like that. Do you feel like you're capable of giving any advice on that level for younger climbers who either haven't experienced it yet or did after your sort of years in the game?
I think in some ways, like, I'm kind of like known as the guy that's lost a lot of climbing partners. Never on a trip with me, but peripherally. And I think I just encourage people to be honest and be true and tell them what they feel, you know. I tell my friends I love them all the time. And I try to urge, you know, my friends who are, I consider equals or even better than me, and then those coming up, like, just be careful, like make good choices. And I try and teach the younger climbers all the mistakes that I made so that they don't have to make them. Because that's the only way I really learned, was by taking the wrong turn before I took the right one. And I really hope that we've rounded the corner and I can see all my young climber friends become full-fledged adults, you know, and be 40 and survive their 20s. But, you know, I've got young friends who are soloing big grade 6 ice routes in the Canadian Rockies and stuff. And that's cool, man. Stop that. Yeah. But you just kind of, all you can do is really just offer your best and hope that they are truly making sound decisions.
Yeah, I mean, because the irony of all that is that your 20-year-old self wouldn't have necessarily listened to your 40-year-old self, even if you could drop in and talk to that dude, because that's the way you are when you're that age. Like, you sort of, I used to tell my 18-year-old students that they were like at the point in their life where the difference between what they thought they knew and what they actually knew was the widest. Like, you think you know everything right now and you don't know shit. And when you're 12 or whatever, you know, you're aware that you don't know things. But it's a weird thing, like for those years, you think you know everything, you don't know shit. And it's just hard to advise those people in these like hard lessons, you know.
Oh my God. I look back at these old photos and videos of even just a decade ago. I'm like, oh my God, I thought I knew it all in climbing. And now it's like almost embarrassing to look at those old photos and videos. You're like, what a gaper.
Well, like we've been saying, at least you can. At least you can look back.
Yeah. Awesome, dude. Thank you.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Clint for pulling that one off. Wasn't so sure at 9 o'clock in the morning it was going to work out, but he called me. I was in the hot tub. He said, I'm ready to go. I said, all right, let me dry off. And we got it done. I'm excited. I couldn't remember a thing we talked about, and then when I went and edited it, I was like, wow, this is awesome. Alaska climbing is such its own thing, isn't it? Do you guys dip into Evan Phillips' podcast, The Fern Line? I'm sure most of you do or have. I'm not a completist, but I definitely dip in and think what Evan's doing at the Fern Line is pretty awesome. He's become the archivist of Alaska climbing, Northern Canada, all that stuff. Good podcast. Okay, folks, I will not be alpine climbing anytime soon, but I will be getting out and rock climbing. The season is upon us here in Colorado, and the desert is warming up. Also, there's an eclipse tomorrow, and some people say it's the rapture. It's going to happen, cutting right across the south there. The rapture does occur. That just means, cliffs are going to be a little less crowded on Tuesday, so get out there. Because Lord knows, pun intended, most of us ain't going to the rapture. Let's face it. But that's okay. We like to suffer down here in our mortal coils, climbing these rocks for no good reason. And besides, nice spring day at the crag with your friends. Hell, you might think you're already in heaven. But let's not hurry to the afterlife. So don't forget to check your knots.
First, we need to find our in-reach. Shit. Oh, God. don't know, man. I mean, like, yeah, you should film that, dude. I'm filming it right now. We were able to run. We got hit by a powder blast. Okay, our kitchen just got ripped to shit. That's our kitchen. Our tent. Don't step right here. That's our kitchen. We can like pick up our tent, fucking move like just as far away as we can get. I gotta find my gloves. My gloves got buried. Our tent might be fucking destroyed too. Yeah, dude. Holy shit. Yeah, our tent's fucking destroyed, dude. This is super fucked.